Right.
We're live.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Isleworth and Brentford Area Forum. A very warm welcome from me, your chair, Salman Shaheen. I'm very pleased that we're able to meet again, although under virtual circumstances. I hope that will not be the case for too much longer. It's now 5:30 p.m, so I'd like to welcome councillors and presenters, as well as all the officers kindly supporting our meeting here today. And as you all may know, new government regulations which were introduced in 2020 as a direct result of the ongoing pandemic allow us here to meet remotely and make decisions. Now, the way that this meeting will work, and I'm sure you heard this spiel before, but I'm obliged to give it to you, is that I as chair will run the meeting and invite people, members of Isleworth and Brentford Area Forum to speak. I'll ask councillors to switch off their cameras and mute their microphones when they're not addressing the meeting, so there's only one person is speaking at any one time. This will minimise background noise and make it all easier for us to see and hear each other. The exception, of course, is Councillor Collins, who is joining this meeting by telephone. So I'm going to make sure that members have ample opportunity to contribute to the meeting, and council officers, of course, supporting the meeting may turn their microphone on at any time to alert me to any procedural or constitutional issue that needs addressing, but I'm hoping that's not going to happen. Okay, as there may be others, like Councillor Collins, who are listening to proceedings, I'll ask that members always say who they are when they make a contribution, and to speak slowly and clearly for the same reason. And just to remind everyone, if you could all switch your cameras off as well as your microphones off when not speaking, I think that helps our internet connection as well. So now I'm going to introduce all the members here present. As I mentioned, I'm Councillor Salman Shaheen, chair of this illustrious Isleworth and Brentford Area Forum, also one of the ward councillors from Isleworth. Now I'm going to go round in turn, first introducing my trusty vice chair, Mel Collins.
Mel Collins, and I represent Brentford Ward, and I'm vice chair of this area forum. Next
we have Unsa Chowdhury.
Hello, I'm Unsa Chowdhury and I'm one of the ward councillors for Osterley and Spring Grove.
We also meant to have Steve Curran. I believe he's having technical difficulties at the moment, but he may be able to. If he is able to make it later, we will introduce him at such a point. We have Theo Dennison as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Theo Dennison. I'm a councillor in Sion Ward.
Next up is Catherine Dunn.
Hello, Catherine Dunn, also a councillor in Sion Ward.
And then we have Richard Eason.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Richard Eason. I represent Osterley and Spring Grove Ward. Thank you.
And Guy Lambert.
Thank you, Chair. Guy Lambert. I'm a member for Brentford Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony Lukey.
Tony Lukey, Labour councillor, Osterley and Spring Grove Ward. Also happen to be the mayor of the London Borough of Hounslow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Danish Said.
Good evening, I'm councillor for Isleworth and I am Danish Said.
Thank you, Danish. And we have Sue Sampson here. No, okay, Corinna Smart.
Oops. Good evening. Hi, Councillor Corinna Smart from Brentford Ward.
Thank you very much, Corinna. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the officers
coming online to the area forum.
Ah, Danish, you're not on mute. Would you mind muting yourself? But thank you for thank you for that. Okay, it now gives me my great pleasure to introduce the officers who are working so hard to, first of all, support this this forum, and also to come here and present to you and those outside as well. So The first agenda item that we have, which will come up in a moment, agenda item 3 on the allotment strategy. Stefania Horn is going to be presenting that. Stefania, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Stefania Horn, Head of Parks and Leisure in Hounslow Council.
Thank you, Stefania. After that, we're going to have an item on the COVID-19 update and also the vaccination rollout. So we have 4 speakers for that. First up, we have Kelly O'Neill.
Good evening, Kelly O'Neill, Director of Public Health for Hounslow.
Thank you, Kelly. We also have Sam Greehey.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Sam Greehey. I'm a Public Health Officer at the London Borough of Hounslow.
Thank you, Sam. We also have Sasha Rathmore.
Good evening, Sasha Rathmore. I'm the new Public Health Officer, Community Engagement.
Thank you very much, Sasha. And then giving our vaccination rollout update, we have Dr. Talak Mahmood.
Good evening, Councillor Shaheen. My name is Talak Mahmood. I'm a GP in Hounslow.
Thank you very much, Talak. And of course, we have our officers supporting this meeting. I'm very pleased that we now have Joan Conlon supporting us, stepping into the very large shoes filled by Mark Frost, who's sadly departed us.
Evening, councillors. Thank you, Chair. Joan Conlon supporting as an APO.
Thank you very much, Joan. And we have Kay Duffy.
Evening, councillors. Kay Duffy from Democratic Services, clerking the meeting this evening.
And also Jyoti Patel.
Yes, good evening. Jyoti Patel, also from Committee Services, supporting Kay, clerking the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. Last but not least, we have a whole team of technical experts who are making this meeting run. I won't introduce them at this stage, but I'm sure they'll introduce themselves if all hell breaks loose and this meeting goes askew. I'm hoping that won't happen, however. So just a final reminder: if everyone's microphones are muted and cameras are off before the meeting commences, then that is okay. And a reminder to everyone, members of the public and members of the Isleworth and Brentford Area Forum as well, that the agenda that we're going to be discussing here tonight can be found on the council website under the Isleworth and Brentford Area Forum meetings page. And I hope everyone has seen that agenda. So just on the technical front, if anyone's having technical problems and needs to log out of the meeting, please do let me know immediately, ideally beforehand by turning on your microphone. And you know, if we need to recap afterwards, that's fine. And yeah, just a big thank you to everyone who's tuned in to watch. And finally, I want to clarify that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the council's YouTube channel in the next few days. If after one viewing live you just can't get enough and have to view it again, I know it's exciting watching, you may well go on the council YouTube, or I'm sure we have John Dale here from Brentford TV also recording this meeting. I'm sure they'll be cut up and spliced up for his website. So anyone speaking, do remember that you may well be famous or infamous after this, and do ensure you're happy to be recorded if you do speak. One note about submitting questions for this evening's meeting. Members of the public were asked to submit questions for the area forum ahead of the meeting where possible, as they're not able to speak to members directly as they would in a conventional meeting. However, for residents watching this meeting, it is possible to submit questions via the Q&A function on Microsoft Teams during the meeting itself. Now, what you need to do is select Q&A on the right side of your screen and type your question into the compose box and then click send. If you would prefer to ask your question anonymously, select ask anonymously. Members will try and answer as many questions as they can on the night. So briefly, you know, we asked for questions submitted in advance. You could have, if they fall neatly under one of our agenda items, they'll be taken at that stage. If they don't fit under one of our agenda items, we'll be taking them open forum. And there will be opportunity to follow up questions as long as time's permitting, and you can type those follow up questions into the Q&A. So hopefully everyone gets a fair chance to speak and they will get enough time to have their questions asked and answered. So without further ado, let us commence. Let battle commence. Right. We'll take apologies for absence. I have had apologies of likely absence due to technical difficulties from Steve Curran. Do we know of any further apologies, anyone?
None received, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll turn to the minutes. Can we seek? Can I seek any corrections or clarifications or matters arising, or are we all okay with the minutes as minuted?
Great.
Okay, thank you for that. For communications from members, sorry, I should have taken that before going to the minutes. Mel, I know you wanted to have a minute or so to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in my role as Vice Chair, as well as supporting you since the last meeting, particularly in trying to help to prepare for this one, I have attended one consultation meeting, which was on the council tax support scheme, and that will come out in the budget to go into cabinet next week. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Stefania Horn, who very kindly went through the document that is item 3 on our agenda, as I submitted some suggestions to the consultation. So I'm well appraised of what's going on this evening. So I've got a special thank you to Stefania because I was able to make a number of suggestions to that consultation. Chair, that's me done.
Thank you very much for that, Mel. And without further ado, we shall go on to Stefania's presentation. So, Stefania, if I could invite you to speak now. If any members of the public have questions during that time, please do put them into the chat box. We'll come back to those in a little bit.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to see the presentation. Excellent. Thank you so much. So tonight, this is a presentation generally about how the allotment strategy has been shaped and what the priorities identified and the next steps. So the strategy, it's clearly linking to a number of corporate strategies and initiatives that the council is also pushing forward. People will be aware that we do have a new corporate plan that also is being reviewed at the moment. As part of the new corporate plan, there are a number of work streams and pillars that we are following through in relation to ambitions and priorities, including health and well-being. The new Thriving Community strategies that have been published last year, and new initiatives, particularly around the environmental initiatives with the Cleaner, Greener, Hounslow and the climate emergency. So the allotment strategy fits into this context. Next. Okay, so Hounslow is very lucky to have a good number of allotments that are managed by our operator Greenspace 360. We have 29 allotments with a total of about nearly 2,000 plots and approximately 555 hectares. There is quite a hefty waiting list which has been increasing during COVID, and people are very interested in our allotments, very popular. And the age groups, also the uptake of the allotment tends to go into the kind of older brackets between 45 and 84. We have a number of societies and community gardens and community groups we're working with. We're working with schools, particularly around special needs. They provide a good respite for children with special needs, and also with the disability groups. So the journey we've been into in terms of engagement, there's been an extensive engagement to put together the allotment strategy, which started in 2019 with an allotment seminar, and then it was followed by focus groups, particularly non-users as well, to test the latent demand and to see how many people who currently do not have an allotment might potentially be wanting that in the future, and a survey as well, an online survey. And during these months, during 2019 and 20, we collected all the results and we put together a draft strategy in spring 2020. We had a bit of a delay because of the pandemic. The plan was to, as soon as the draft strategy was produced, we were going to go to consultation for effectively ratification of the strategy and validation from the general public. This took place in summer 2020, and then the final strategy. So the report was put together in autumn, and the final strategy for ratification then was produced. So in terms of the key commitments of the strategy, there has been a huge consensus amongst allotment holders and all the recipients from the consultation that these commitments were the right commitments, which were the improving infrastructure and enhance the customer experience, strengthen our partnership, particularly with obviously allotment holders, but also societies, groups, community groups, schools, etc. And also having a kind of good strand for health and well-being, working together with GPs, for example, for social prescribing. Huge opportunities here. But particularly also looking at improving management practices to improve service standards. The allotment service has been underfunded for a number of years, and the resources are scarce. And clearly that was pretty much an agreement with everyone, really, that this was a priority that we needed to focus on. And particularly also looking at interventions that could improve sustainability and looking after the environment. So the action plan of the strategy identifies 27 projects and interventions to deliver those commitments. Again, those projects were identified through the consultation and through the comments that we received during the first engagement. And when we did go through the second consultation, which was the validation, that validated these 27 projects, which we would like to put forward, obviously, as part of the implementation of the strategy. The focus of these projects were accessibility, particularly around entrances, access, etc., toilet provision, water capture system, and particularly around better management as well. There was a lot of consensus that that we needed to improve the way we manage the waiting list and the vacant sites, and we can ensure the speedy relet of the sites, since there is a huge demand. The allotments forum is clearly a key priority of the action plan that will allow us to then go through these 27 projects and the details behind these 27 projects. I mean, these projects are high-level projects, so potentially behind those projects there might be some sub-projects and priorities that we identify together with allotment holders. We're very keen to continue the engagement and co-design on how we want to move with these improvements, and the allotment forums will be key to do that. And that's the first priority, and the first forum will be set up and take place in this month, in February. And finally, there is a commitment to monitor performance. Obviously, we are keen to make sure that we measure ourselves in terms of, are we doing it right, and are we progressing right? So clearly, there's going to be a continuous review on that. So the consultation results, this was the engagement that effectively helped us for the validation of the draft strategy. Pretty much effectively validated all the priorities, all the action plan and everything else. And the 91% agreed on the borough visions. We got it right. 84% agreed to improve infrastructure, that was a key priority. 69% agreed on better partnership. 84% agreed on improving management practices. And 76% wants us to be a little bit more greener and sustainable on our allotments and how we deal with that. And the most common themes in all the responses was that we needed to increase resources and capacity, and there was an acknowledgement that was an issue to move forward. So far, in terms of progress, we moved on since obviously we identified that the strategy was right and we captured the right messages and people were agreeing on the projects that we wanted to put forward. So we rolled up our sleeve and effectively already progressed some of the recommendations that would be key to progress this strategy. So people asked us better accessibility and having more accessibility, particularly for people without gardens. So we introduced the implementation of the micro gardens as a pilot. That was very during the summer, and that was very successful. So we obviously want to continue with that. We had already some infrastructure improvements, which were basic stuff that really guarantees security. Again, security and safety was one of the major priorities identified. So we changed the locks to make them stronger. And some of the sites, did not have functional locks either. So we just did make sure that was the first priorities. We did some interventions on fencing and on paths that were really at the end of their lives. But this is just an initial start. Obviously, there is a lot to do on these 29 sites. So this is just a start on some of the sites that were really in dire need of improvement. We started a pilot compostable toilet project, and we've identified a model that potentially could work. So the next step is to make sure that we pilot that in one of the sites. And also we scope the water back provision to make sure that we can have a scheme that is affordable and acceptable to all, which obviously we need to then discuss with the allotment holders as soon as we meet through the forum. We started communication with the engagement for the first allotment forum. The communication should have been going this week or at the beginning of next week anyway, to invite people over to the first allotment forum. We started a review of the terms and conditions. Again, there was quite a clear preference from the consultation that the terms and conditions were in need of review, and the reviews of the fees and charges that I know some of you obviously have seen as part of the single member decision that went with the strategy, and the new proposal that obviously needs a further engagement to make sure that we are pitching it right. So for further information, all the documents are online. The strategy, the consultation results are all online. The email address for allotments is allotments@hounslow, but we also set up a specific allotment charges email address for the engagement. It's a non-response email, and there will be a letter that is going to go out to all allotment holders next week requesting feedback on the fees and charges, and they can use that email address for that feedback. And finally, there is an online form to request any service request, like there is a damage to the fence or a path that is not is not accessible, or the entrances, that kind of stuff. So that's also available. Any questions on that, Chair?
Thank you very much for that presentation, Stefania. That was really interesting to see. You're certainly right. I mean, a lot of the correspondence I've seen around it coming from Cole Park allotments, which are in my ward of Isleworth, raised questions around the fees and charges. I think you've pointed people to where they can go within your presentation to raise concerns around that. But we'll first of all we'll take questions from members of the public. I suspect that may be the theme of some of the questions we've had in already, but I'll hand over to Joan to take those forward.
Thank you, Chair. Are you okay to take them in batches of 4, because we've got a considerable amount of questions?
Yes,
sure, that
thank
makes sense.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is from Hilary Simpkins. Can you please explain why rental charges to our borough residents are so significantly higher, £250 per annum as opposed to 120, which is over 100% more? Secondly, I understand there was a large error in the figure for Richmond upon Thames borough charges, which raised the average for the whole of London boroughs. Presumably, this figure was used to calculate the new charge. Will this error be corrected in order to come up with a more reasonable figure? And the last one from Hilary is it possible for the new charges, which are often quite steep, to be phased in gradually to allow tenants to adjust? And then one larger one from Karen and Alan Paley from the Cole Park allotments. We're writing to you for support against the increase in the annual charges for allotment holders raised by Hounslow Council. We, my husband and I, are pensioners living in St Margaret's, and we're cultivating our plots, Cole Park allotments, since 2009. Before this, we have over 2 years where we were waiting on the waiting list. When we replied, we were not allocated a specific allotment site. Passing the open gates of Cole Park site in early March 2009, we strolled through and discovered many completely overgrown plots that had not been cultivated previously for several years. She then goes on to say, the reason why I tell you our history with Cole Park is because the pay increase of over 300% from £78 to £250 from being a non-Hounslow resident hits us quite hard. First of all, when we joined the site, there was obviously open to everyone, and secondly, there was no discrimination in terms of the fees. To move the goalposts after 12 years with an established plot and us now being pensioners is rather unfair. Several years ago, we heard the waiting list was now closed for non-residents. From our observations, the plots tenanted by Richmond residents are in good shape. The plots left and right from us are brambles or grass with giant trampolines, I think she's saying. Finally, we're both over 65 now with health issues, and for us the plot was our safe haven throughout the pandemic. If Hounslow Council have to raise their income from the allotment sides, they have to do it according to the rate of inflation in a staggered approach and honour the current plot holders' previous contracts and stated terms and conditions. There are a couple more, Chair, but are you happy for Stefania to address those first?
Yes, that makes sense. Though, Joan, first of all, should we ascertain as to whether the remaining questions are of the same theme? Because it may be that Stefania can answer all the questions if they're similar repeat themes there.
Yes, indeed. The next one is about increased charges. The next one is the final one, or penultimate one, is when specific infrastructure improvements have been identified for a specific allotment, will you consult with all the plot holders as to whether these are what they would have wanted to have introduced? Then we've got the Cole Park, again, they're talking about the price increase. And then Grace Park from the Park Road Allotment Gardens has asked about community gardens being cited in the strategy, but not privately owned and managed allotments like Park Road Allotments. That border sign ward. She's asking, so that's that. There's two more, Chair, and one that's just come through the chat, asking if we could have an update on Park Road Allotments also. And that's it, Chair.
So I would suggest maybe we take. Well, actually, that. I think, Stefania, are you happy to do all that now in one go? Because I think most of them have a theme, and then we've also got the Park Road question as well. So if you're happy, then I'll hand over to you.
Yes, Chair, no problem. So with regards to the steep increase for the outdoor borough charges, the rationale behind it is because the allotment service has been underfunded and for a number of years and heavily subsidised for a number of years. I mean, since I've been in the council, which I started in 2015, there has been no reviews of the fees and charges, and actually that goes probably before that. And we've fallen behind really in the opportunity to then adjust some of the fees and charges changes that were happening in London, and the benchmarking exercise helped us to do that. So we now proposing a position that puts us in another position for the general charges. I do agree with the lady that mentioned that the Richmond figures was the wrong figure. That was a figure that was given to us by Parks for London, which subsequently they told us it was a typing mistake. But that doesn't mean that, for example, in terms of out-of-borough charges, the out of borough charges, the concept of that and why they are so expensive is because the non-residents do not contribute to council tax, and to effectively they are heavily subsidised from the council. So there is that logic that a non-resident should pay a premium for an allotment plot, particularly when we have 800 people on the waiting list and residents who don't have a space and don't have a plot. I do understand that clearly that it's a massive change for people, but in terms of what people wanted to do in terms of phased approach, for example, that could be part of the feedback. And that's exactly why we're going out to consultation to see what feedback is going to come out and what the impact on that on people and the solutions that people might give us in terms of perhaps adjusting some of the things. But in terms of the charges for non-residents, is pretty clear in terms of, I think, just to give you an idea, allotments at the moment are heavily subsidised to the region of we probably spend in terms of expenditure about between 250,000 to 280,000 pounds per year on allotments, and the income is only 80,000. So that means that effectively we're heavily subsidising allotment holders, and which we'll continue to do because it's a good thing to be doing. But non-residents who don't contribute to council tax, so clearly, that there is a rationale that charge needs to be higher, and that charge can be any charge. To be honest, it's in terms of the charges, the legislation is pretty clear on allotments that the council can authorise a choice on charges, providing they're proving reasonable, and that was the purpose of the benchmarking. With regards to the infrastructure, that question on infrastructure and can the allotment holders contribute to the choices? Absolutely. That's exactly why we want to establish a functional allotments forum that allow us to communicate with the representatives of each allotment sites and discuss our improvement programs together and decide together. That would be a co-design process where we would like to really shape the future of the allotments together with the allotment holders, and that would be definitely something that we would be keen to do. With regards to community gardens and why we've included not private allotments, that's purely because there is no control on private allotments. There is one action in the action plan that asks to review the policy on the local plan for allotments and strengthen that if possible. And that action would hopefully protect some of the sites that are in private ownership. But and that action is in the action plan. So we will look to work with planning to make sure that we can then strengthen that if we can. But specific interventions on private allotment sites are something that is out of our control and we couldn't include them. I hope that answered all of the points.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry to interrupt you. I do beg your pardon. That covers the questions on the allotment that have come in through the chat and through the pre-delivered.
Thank you very much, Joan. Thank you very much, Stefania. I'm going to turn to members' questions now, members of the Isleworth and Brentford Area Forum. I would ask that you, I mean, unless you have a follow-up from something Stefania said in relation to members of the public's questions, I would ask you don't repeat members of the public's questions, because I know we've all had a lot of them through to us, and I think it's right that they were put directly to Stefania. But if you have follow-ups on top of them, please do ask those. Okay, so I have Tony and then Richard asking to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A few questions arising out of that report. And I'll accept one response, but if not, if it's not adequate, maybe I'll come back with supplementary. Right, there's a demand for allotments The people from Cole Park mentioned that when they went down, they found some empty allotments or overgrown allotments. That still happens. That still happens. You go around, you know, I've been quite a few allotments as mayor this time round, and you know, I've got family that has allotments in some better managed places, but there are a number that are empty. Do we know who's got the allotments? Do we know how many years that that fees have not been paid on the allotments, but they continue to be under occupied? The other is some people have more than one allotment. They hire more than one allotment. You know, if there is such a demand, why yeah, how are we going to find ways? What ways are we going to find to you know, one person, one allotment? Yeah, I mean, you know, they call me a socialist, but yeah, one person, one allotment. That's the only way, really, again, to assuage demand. There are other allotments that I've been to that could probably well manage themselves. And you know, what strategies are we going to employ as a local authority to help create local management of allotments by yeah, obviously, you know, not giving them away, not giving away freehold, you know, not allowing the people who manage them to sell the allotments to developers to build high-rise flats with no balconies. But yeah, how are we going to you know, how are we going to allow local people who have got, there's local nuance to some allotments to manage it themselves. Yeah, I know that we've got some allotments, abandoned allotments, St James's Street, and they don't feature in that allotment strategy. And what we failed to do as a local authority, we didn't put a map in there on that allotment strategy to show where these allotments are. We mention them by name, but we don't. We need a map. There is a map, a specific map that tells you how many. Okay, all right. My apologies. My apologies. I don't know if that's on the website either. And then finally, we've got a lot of. We understand food poverty. We've got, and if I look at, you know, if I look at the development of flats, of apartments and I allude to St James's Street allotments here. It's not in my ward, it's in Hounslow Central Ward, but I allude to that. We've got about 2,000 flats built within a 15-minute walk, and I use that number and that time frame because I'm modelling it on our demands for Thornbury Park, where we are getting very. Let me just slip this one in. We're getting very little resource from the council on Thornbury Park. We have to beg for that. The leader of the council's yeah, listening at last on that. So let's you know, how do we maximise the ones that we've got and not allow them to be you know, snatched for development because there is such a great demand. And also finally, there's a lot of people that have moved into Hounslow, that live in Hounslow, that have got that possibly come from an agrarian background. And they like a bit of allotment. If you go down to some of the allotments, you go down to the allotments at back of Lambton Park, and that's United Nations there. You go down to Hatton allotments. You know, that's United Nations there. The world is there, growing their types. Yeah, growing domestic and their types of produce. You know, how are we going to encourage people from different backgrounds and make them aware? Because I don't think a lot of this allotment strategy, it's all right for me, it's all right for white people, and it's all right for people that are engaged normally, but how are we going to how are we going to encourage people from different backgrounds to participate in these forums? Because I reckon it's going to be the same old guys, the same old geezers, and no disrespect to old geezers, I'm one merely, but you know, how are we going to get other people going to get a diverse diverse participation in our allotments? Do you remember all that, or do you want me to bullet point it for you?
I do remember that, Councillor Luque. I did took notes, but yeah.
I'd suggest maybe, Stefan, if you come back to Tony now, I'll then take Richard. We also have a few more questions have come in from the chat, which I will return to. But maybe if you come back, because Tony had a lot of questions, so I think it'd be unfair to move on until you've answered those.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So with regards to overgrown allotments, you're absolutely right. And that was one of the issues that was actually captured as well through the consultation and was captured through the action plan in relation. We need to tackle that through better monitoring and better also management of terms and conditions. The key issue that we have at the moment, which we also discussed at the seminar and with all the interested parties, was that the resource at the moment in Green Space 360 is not enough to monitor nearly 2,000 plots that we have, and to then implement the quick turnaround of reletting of the plot. There needs to be some strengthening of their administration for that. And that was one of the discussions that we had, and everybody agreed that perhaps a review of the fees and charges and an increase of the fees and charges could help in bringing in this additional resource that then can help managing this overgrown site. So that's the only way we can tackle the waiting list. In terms of the people with more than one allotments, I just came across this recently, Councillor Luki, and you're absolutely right. I think with the 800 people on a waiting list, we have to do something about it. And some people actually, when I had a meeting with the Colpax allotment a couple of weeks ago, and they suggested that maybe we should charge more the people with more than one allotment to deter them. And certainly I would like to know the numbers, and that's the first thing that I would want to do. I want to know how many people have got more than one allotment, and what do we need to do to make sure that that doesn't really impact on our management of the waiting list. It could be that there are not many, but it depends on how many we have, and then we can see what we can do on that. But I agree with you, we need to look at that. With regards to local community group effectively becoming independent and managing allotments for us, I think it's absolutely right, the right direction to have and to be doing. A lot of councils have allotments leased to allotment societies, and the allotment societies are pretty much independent, and they deal with the allotment holders. I hope I understood your question, Councillor Luki, but if that was the question, then definitely the strategy tackles that, and there is one particular action on the action plan that says we should really work on increasing this opportunity to lease some of the sites to the allotment societies, because they're already strong community groups on site. They do a lot of good work. And with regards to food poverty, clearly we're already working with some of the allotment society allotment groups to actually contribute to food banks and the distribution of food for people who are not who are in hardship, and the reasons why also we reviewed the fees and charges, it was also to address concessions, and we decreased the cost of fees and charges for people on concessions. At the moment, they pay £36 plus per 410 rod plus water charges, and what we're proposing is that we scrap the water charges and they would pay only the £36. So that's hopefully to address as well the support to people who perhaps are in hardship. And with regards to the ethnicity and the demographics of allotment holders, again, you're absolutely right. This is not uncommon. There are some cultural barriers that are actually stopping some people being interested in allotment. Some cultures are really clearly not interested, but other cultures, perhaps you're right, perhaps our outreach needs to be a bit better, and certainly we want to improve that as well, because you're absolutely right. At the moment, the demographic is not very diverse, and we would like to reach out and make sure that we can be representative as well as much as we can.
Thanks, Stefania. I'm going to come to Richard now. Richard Eason, if you've got any questions that haven't already been addressed by Stefania, please do raise them.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, Stefania, I very much welcome the allotment strategy, and I probably want to build on some of the comments that Councillor Luki has made. and I also wanted to highlight my concern that the allotment strategy was not updated to reflect the feedback provided by the 200 people in the consultation in the summer. I think you, in your presentation, you said that it was a validation consultation. That certainly wasn't what I thought it was when I spent about half a day reading and collating my submission on that. If it was a validation, I probably wouldn't have spent that time back in June. Now, in terms of, my feeling was that the strategy isn't ambitious enough, and some of the things that have been that you've just spoken about are phased there as either medium or long term. So looking at the overgrown allotments is phased as a medium to be done in the period from now to 2023. Looking at self-management is marked as a long-term item to 2025. I would urge you to look at how we can do some of these things quicker. For example, if we can empower allotment societies to be doing a degree of self-management, then they have potential to raise their own funds, perhaps from members or their immediate community, but also from the myriad of external grants that are available around food poverty, anti-obesity. There's a whole myriad of things where there are small grants available from outside of the borough that allotment societies may be able to, would be able to apply for. Looking at my own ward, Ostley Spring Grove, I'm very disturbed that I'm very concerned that there's only 12 allotments in 12 plots in our ward, and I'm sure that there's a great deal more demand. So more generally, I'd like some guidance for ward councillors on what types of land we might be able to target for conversion, acquisition and conversion to allotments. For example, is there types of London Underground or Network Rail land which might be suitable for allotments but not suitable for other purposes? I think there's an opportunity to engage ward councillors quite a lot more about with the allotments and the allotment societies on their patch, in the same way that ward councillors are actively involved with policing on their wards, attending ward panels and such like, and encouraging neighbourhood watch and other forms of resident empowerment. I'd like to see ward councillors playing a similar enabling role with the with allotments. So yeah, I would welcome being able to contribute to this, to making the strategy more ambitious and delivered sooner and faster. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I'll ask Stefania to come back on your points there. Then I'll ask Joan to wrap up the final questions that have come from residents since we've been speaking.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Eason, I think the validation of the consultation was purposely done so that we can go back to the people who were involved, or ideally people who were not involved at the beginning, to effectively tell us, did we guess the priorities right? Did we get the priorities right? Did we get the actions right? Is that something that different that we need to do? And there was a consultant who helped us collating all the information and prepared a report, and the report is published online. And if you look at the report, I've read the report line by line in relation to that before, obviously, making a judgment whether there was something that we needed to change. And I thought the report was perfectly in line with the strategy. I didn't think there was a need to put anything in particular different, because if you look at the action plan is quite generic, and the view is that if we can then have the forum up and running, we can then work together with the allotment holders directly in making sure that those action plans are actually potentially reviewed every year, because I'm not expecting this strategy to be static for 5 years. So this strategy needs to be continuously reviewed and continuously updated by working with allotment holders and by working on the details behind the 27 interventions. So that's the gist. But I will be happy, very happy, to sit down with you, Councillor Eason, because if the consultant, for example, did not pick up some of your points, it might be possible. Then I would like to discuss that and see what changes are you think they are necessary, and also I can go through line by line with the report to show you and to reassure you that actually the exercise I think validated the strategy in that sense. So that could be done. With regards to the timeline, and some of the actions are long term and some of the actions are medium terms, etc. It doesn't mean that we would not start to work on those immediately, but it just simply means that it will take longer to see a result, because they're more complex actions and they're more like actions that requires more of a complex work that will take time. So that's why it's long term, is to get people the understanding that it will take us sometimes to achieve what we want to achieve, but it doesn't mean that we're not starting working now. I hope that clarifies for you. And finally, for your questions about the opportunity to engage ward councillors, absolutely. I mean, we can just have an idea on how we can perhaps have something in terms of communication that can go back to you in relation to what's been discussed at the forum. For example, we can publish the minutes of the forums online, and we can see how we can then discuss further any particular actions that are relevant to your ward. And by all means, if you want to be part of those discussions, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely something that we can do.
Thank you very much, Stefania. So before we go on to the next item, which for which we have, I think, we'll have quite a long presentation and Q&A, we will take the last of the questions from the members of the public. Joan.
Thank you, Chair. So this one again talks about the average, which is 250 for out of borough residents. 250 is above the average. The second one is from a lady called Anne. Plot holders with more than one plot will the council consider huge, in brackets, incremental costs for additional allotments. The strategy site states 29 allotment sites, but the local plan says 32. So what's happened to the 3 that you've lost? And that was from Christine Dywell. And finally, plot holders having more than one plot. This individual says they know of 2 husbands and wives in one household who've a plot each. Will the council look into this? And the final one has just popped in, Chair. I hope you'll graciously allow me to just, will the council consider buying private allotment land to enhance the borough's supply where there's high demand and where there's low provision, as in Sign Ward, where the current provision is only 1 per 1,000 families? That's all the questions that have come in this part, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stefania.
Okay, so with regards to the £250, which is above average, it might be with the new figure. I think the average was about 211, but that, in my view, it's quite irrelevant, because the council can decide and any charges for non-residents for the reasons of the fact that these plots are heavily subsidised, and there is no contribution from non-residents to this subsidy. So, but again, it's something that it will come back from the feedback, and it's something that we could look at, and also particularly around the huge cost increase for additional allotments site. If somebody has got more than one allotment, that's something that we can consider as well, and this could be part of the feedback. I mean, this is not the first time that this is coming up, so that's interesting, because I think people would be interested in seeing that as a kind of fairness, and we can consider that. With regards to the question of the local plan, that says 32 allotments and we've got 29. I think this is about historical use of land and how the land was used in the past, but the allotment strategy, I mean, the sites that we've got, the 29 allotment sites, are the sites that have been actively worked as allotments for a number of years, and also they are statutory allotments. The other sites might have been allotments, say, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, but then they were no longer allotments. They've not been allotments for a long time, and they're not statutory allotments. So the strategy did not include that in as part of this strategy. However, obviously, this is a discussion that we are having with our colleagues as part of the local plan, and looking at opportunities at the same time for additional allotment sites, for example. And I think there was one on provision, wasn't it? I didn't pick up the last one.
Apologies,
Sorry.
Chair. I'm just going to go back in. Yep, bear with me for 1 second. There was about considering buying private allotment land to enhance the borough supply. Sign Ward, the current provision is only one.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. So yes, absolutely. I mean, I think buying land might be. It depends if we manage. If sustainably we can manage the cost of maintaining it, because as I said to you, allotments are heavily subsidized, but certainly on the strategy there is an action plan, from the action plan that says we need to work with developers to perhaps identify the areas where there is no provision, and then that could be linked to development conditions, and then provide allotment lands as part of that development condition. That could be an option, for example, that could be managed through development. And Chair, if I may, I've seen through the comments on site about the cultures not being interested, etc. I just wanted to clarify, because I would hate to be misunderstood. I didn't say that some cultures are definitely not interested. I said that there might be that they're not interested, but you're absolutely right, Councillor Lukey. I think it's more to do with it's about going out and trying to engage this community, which is obviously something that we've got to do harder, because as I said to you, the diversity is not great at the moment. So I hope it clarifies.
Thank you very much for that. Tony, I'll come back to you, but briefly, because we do have a lot more to get through, and I'm going to have to move on from this item. So if you could make a brief contribution.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Look, the thing is, I'm just concerned that we take on consultants. I don't know who they are. I don't know who these consultants were. I don't know what their brief was. But did they go to the right people? How did they engage with people from all backgrounds? And were they thorough in this? And we already have local management of allotments. Chiswick Horticultural Allotment Society does manage local allotments, so it's nothing new. It's nothing unusual. We do need to explore this better. And those other three sites, where are they? What are they? And the other one is, let me just showboat a little bit. Let's pay the Duke of Northumberland the same amount of money for that open space that is being used as allotments as his predecessors paid for it. I bet he hasn't got a receipt for it.
Stefania, did you want to come back on that?
Yes. So the consultants, in effect, the consultants were given the brief to go out, particularly with the focus groups, and to assess the latent demand. And clearly, they did assess that there is an interest from allotment from all cultures and from all sides. But what I was referring to in the diversity was the fact that our current allotment holders are not diverse, and therefore I think there's going to be a campaign when we publicise allotments, and that's where I think our efforts needs to go to, when we publicise and when we go to get new new people in, and that's where we're trying to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible. I mean, even with the waiting list, Councillor Luki, we don't really know, you know, the diversity of the waiting list. But my guess is that that you know, we need to check whether we've got that data or not. So I don't really know whether we can find out, for example, the current interest as well in the waiting list. But I'll try to find out whether we have. My guess is that we don't really ask people those data. So, but for the future, maybe that could be something that we want to do. We ask that kind of data so that we know.
Thanks, Stefania. Thanks everyone for their questions and comments. If further questions come in, and I think actually I did see one that has come in but not been published yet, but I think that can be answered by email. And I think if further questions come in on the Q&A on this topic, we will provide email responses. But I want to thank Stefania for your time here tonight and for answering those questions. We do have another presentation here for you tonight, and that is why it's important that we move on to that to give it the time it's due. It's on the biggest question of our age, COVID, and how we're responding to it. So I'm going to hand over to Kelly O'Neill, Sam Greehey and Sasha Rathmore for the first part of the presentation, followed by a presentation by Dr. Talat Mahmood on the vaccine rollout. And all questions will be taken at the end. Some may have been submitted in advance. As before, put it in the Q&A if you want to submit a question live, and we will try to get through all those questions.
Thank you, Councillor. If you can pop this presentation up, please. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to give, with my colleagues, Sam and Sasha, I'm going to just give an overview of where we are in terms of our response to the pandemic to date. Sam's going to take us through the data. He's our public health analyst, and Sasha, who's our new engagement officer who started in the middle of January, is going to explain sort of our communication, some of our communications and our engagement work that we're doing to date. So this is where we currently are in terms of our pandemic curve. So let me just quickly explain this particular graph to you. This is a pandemic curve of the positive cases that we've had in the borough. To date, we've had just over 22,000 positive cases. These are registered cases, so it's not actually indicative of the true number of infections that we've had. If you look at between March and May, that small first wave is just is solely based on reported cases that were confirmed on hospital admission. So that was the only time we're at that point where there was any form of testing going on. So in reality, that wave is actually much bigger, but at the moment that's the only information that we have had because of the fact that there was no testing. And then as we move into sort of June, July time, key workers were being tested, and we had very much a slowdown in activity. And come towards August time, that's when community testing really started to take off. This was open to the general public who was symptomatic. Now, as we've moved into September time and the return of schools, we started to see an increase in the number of cases. This was expected when you have people moving around the borough, people congregating together in whatever settings, you will naturally get an increase in transmission of infection. Moving into November, we had lockdown 2, which we refer to as lockdown light. Essentially, it was nowhere near the lockdown that we saw in March time, and there were still lots of people moving around. But if you look at coming out of that lockdown, the impact of that lockdown wasn't really felt at all in the borough. And actually, that's been a consistent trend in Hounslow, is that the number of key workers that we have within the borough means that there is still a lot of movement around the borough by people legitimately, and therefore, compared to other London boroughs, we don't see quite a dramatic decline in the rate of infection. So as we move into December time, I put some reference points in here. So if you look at the 12th of December, you'll see that our rate was 171 per 100,000 population. As you then move a month later, we're at 1,141 cases per 100,000. That's well over 3,000 cases in any 7 days. Obviously, the 12th of January was indicative because it's between 11 and 18 days after Christmas and the New Year. And that's the period of time which is most concerning, because one, you'll get the greatest number of cases, but two, you start to see a significant impact in hospitalizations and the people who develop more severe symptoms. Key to that was round about the peak. What I would say is, because of this lag between infection, people getting infected, and the infection rate, what you then see is this long sort of, as I say, 11 to 18 days while hospitalizations occur. So while our rate of infection has declined, very, very slowly and much slower than most other London boroughs, the activity in the hospital will be lagging behind that. So hospital activity is starting to decline, but again, not at the rate we would have hoped, given that our rate of infection has not declined rapidly. So as of today, our rate of infection is 400 per 100,000 population. That equates to about 1,100 people in the last 7 days who tested positive. Next slide, please. This is London. So all of the 33 boroughs in London, we don't tend to count the City of London as a separate borough because it's a statistical anomaly. So what you'll see here is that this was taken on the 3rd of February. The darker the purple, the higher the rate of infection. What we tend to see with pandemics is that infection behaves in waves, so it will move geographically across different areas. Some areas will be more adversely affected, particularly areas that have a much more diverse community, and as I say, areas that have much more people who are key workers. At the moment, with Ealing, Hounslow has one of the highest rates of infection in London. We are tackling this, but it's quite a dynamic situation. We've just got to keep on top of it. Next slide, please. So this is COVID surveillance in Hounslow. This is the total number of cases by ward. This is an accumulated number. So this is all of the cases that we've had between the end of February and the 31st of January. Again, the same principle applies. The darker the colouring, the higher the case numbers in the ward. So what you'll see is this rather large area within sort of central part of the borough that is where the majority of cases have been throughout the pandemic. These are the areas that we've had to tackle in a really targeted way. They've consistently been higher than any other area in the borough, although we do get occasionally a bit of an outbreak in one of the other boroughs. That means that sometimes we have to really refocus our action towards a different area short term. So Sam, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. So I'm just sort of going to second what Kelly has just referenced. Moyni, if you go back to the previous slide, sorry. So I'm just going to sort of give a quick breakdown of the picture in Hounslow, and then specifically in the wards which you councillors are all representative of, and also talk about how we sort of monitor and analyse and assess the picture within Hounslow. So, and also focusing on sort of documenting and how I've documented this recent increase sort of in this December period. So I've used the 20th of December as a consistent sort of point of time in the previous area forums that we've presented at. And so number of cases that we had recorded on the 20th of December was 8,374. And in just over a month and a bit's time, the situation has changed drastically, as Kelly's graph showed beforehand. And so on the 31st of January, we had recorded 21,921 cases. So that equates to about 162% increase in just over a month. In terms of the demographic factors of those that have tested positive, The gender breakdown has been an even spread, sort of a 50-50 spread. But then in terms of the age profile, so we monitor this closely, we've seen the bulk majority of cases have been within this working age population, as the statistics there show, about 70%. But what we in public health do seem to keep a close eye on is the number of cases and proportion of cases over the age of 60, as the risk is exacerbated by those that contract COVID when they're over the age of 60. And so that has sort of been averaging 15% throughout the entirety of the pandemic, and even in the 7-day periods of which we monitor each situation and Hounslows' position, we've sort of been between this 13 to 15% region. We do consider ethnicity, and we do look at ethnicity, but again, one of the key issues with the ethnicity element to those that do test positive is it is really, really poorly documented, and it makes it very difficult to sort of act upon this information to sort of create further engagement or particular communications. Because it's so poorly documented, it makes it difficult to come up with general conclusions. Next slide, please, Moina. So these are some of the key parameters that we consider each day when we are monitoring. We cover a 7-day report, which usually follows a 3-day lag, just because that's where the more complete information comes in. So on the right, I'll draw your attention to the right. This was the information we received yesterday. And these are the key parameters which we consider. So our 7-day infection rate yesterday was 424. As Kelly mentioned today, it's dropped down to 400. But a 7-day case total was 1,152. About 72% of cases were within the age of 20 to 59 within that working age adult population. 170 of those cases were over the age of 60. Our case positivity was 8.9%, and case positivity is the proportion of tests completed which do come back positive. So ideally we want to keep that as low as possible, because the higher it is, the more indicative there may be a greater community spread. 7-day pillar 2 tests, so this is the number of tests conducted outside in the wider population at testing sites or at home. So the higher number of tests, the more complete picture we have of the borough, and so that was at 13,716. Our position within London and in the wider position in England, it frequently changes, and so it's often dynamic, especially when the position is decreasing, which is at the moment. And then in terms of deaths, we are monitoring. We have been monitoring the number of deaths that we've been reported to us by Public Health England, and as of January so far, which will continue to increase in the next few days because there is some form of lag. We have reported 188 COVID deaths alone in January, and in comparison to December, that was only 53. To draw your attention to the text on the left, this is just a comparison to when our infection rate was at 1141 on the 12th of December, as Kelly mentioned. And the key differences here to consider are obviously the infection rate, the case total, the number of cases over the age of 60, that being 445, the case positivity rate being 23%, and the number of 7-day pillar 2 tests being conducted was far fewer. And also to draw your attention to the number of deaths was far fewer as well. Next slide, please, Moina. So this is another map showing the number of cases in that 7-day period, most recent 7-day period across the borough. And again, the general overall trend that we can see is that even in the 7-day periods, the highest case burden is still within sort of the central and midwestern areas of Hounslow Central, Hounslow West, Cranford, Heston West, and Hounslow Heath. And we can see again that Chiswick and the east side of the borough have seen considerably fewer cases. Again, just what I mentioned beforehand, when monitoring the geography of COVID-19 cases, certainly using a 7-day period, especially when the infection rate is reducing, it often presents quite a dynamic picture. So last week when Kelly and I presented at the Bedfont and Hamworth and Feltham Area Forum, Bedfont had recorded 149 cases in that time frame. But as you can see, in just under a week later, the position is significantly shifted due to this general decrease. Next slide, please, Moina. So this is a hotspot map. So this measures a couple of things. This measures proximity of cases, but cases that we receive at postcode level. And so what the purpose of this map is therefore used to do is it helps us identify where in particular wards we are seeing hotspots of cases and clusters of cases. And so this is useful for a number of reasons. Firstly, we can target our resources in these areas, such as our communications and engagement. So we can particularly focus on areas where we've seen higher number of cases within those particular areas, if we're going to use a postcode area, for example. Additionally, we can also target where we believe our testing sites should be set up. And what we've been more recently doing is working with our enforcement teams to conduct patrols and site visits in areas where have displayed the greatest number of cases and where the proximity of cases is highest. Next slide, please, Moina. Now, this slide considers infection rates per 100,000 by ward. So the previous purple map you would have seen was absolute numbers in the last 7 days. This is an infection rate per 100,000. And what this enables us to consider again is basically being able to see where specific impact is greatest. And it also considers the population size of the wards, because when we consider Hounslow more generally, with our infection rate being at 424 in this time period, we can see that there are specific areas due to smaller population sizes where the impact is greatest, such as Hounslow West, Cranford and Heston West. And interestingly enough, because despite Hounslow Central having one of the highest numbers of cases in the previous 7-day period, because it's got such a large population, its infection rate is much lower in comparison to areas such as Heston West, where the population size is different. Next slide, please, Moina. So if we now focus more specifically on the Brentford, Isleworth, Osterley and Sion areas, the general number of cases from the entirety of the pandemic from February of last year to the 31st of January, there has been 4,169 confirmed cases within these wards, which comes to about a proportion of 19% of total cases. Brentford has documented the highest number of cases and a proportion of about 5.5%. What we have noticed, certainly from looking at all of the wards across the borough, but particularly in these areas, is there has been a significant increase since the 20th of December. And if I draw your attention to the far right side of the table, you can see the percentage increases in the number of cases from the 20th to the 31st. And all of these wards have really documented a significant increase. But in terms of their position within Hounslow, their ranking in terms of burden numbers is it's clear to see that the impact has been noticeably greater in other areas. Despite Brentford considerably having a high number of cases, it's still ranked only 8th. So the impact has, as I've shown in the maps previously, the impact has been felt greatest within Hounslow Central and Heston West and Hounslow West precisely. Next slide, please, Moina. So if we consider this across time from September onwards, this is the cumulative number of COVID-19 cases. This is basically enabling us to consider where the lowest performing wards in terms of case numbers and the highest performing wards in terms of case numbers, and then where the wards where you are representative of and how they've performed. What's interesting is that earlier in the pandemic, sort of in this October, November time, Brentford was high up on our radar with cases being quite high in comparison to the rest. But what we've seen, despite the drastic increase from December onwards, more recently we've seen, certainly with Brentford and Isleworth, Sion and Osterley, is the rate of increases slowed and has not gone up as quickly in comparison to these the areas where we've seen higher cases. And as you can see, the gradient is far steeper in those and has continued to be quite steep. Next slide, please, Moina. So in terms of the test positive profile of cases that reside in Brentford, Isleworth and Osterley, the picture is quite similar to what we've seen across the entirety of the pandemic and the rest of the borough. The breakdown, we've seen slightly more women test positive within these wards than men, 52% to 48%. In terms of the age profile, again, it's very, very similar. 15% under the age of 20, 70% of cases of working age, and then 15% of cases again over the age of 60. I've put occupation there because this information is it is an option for those that do go and get a test to provide. However, as I mentioned beforehand with ethnicity, it's very, very, very incomplete, which it can be quite frustrating for us when we analyse it to see, because we want to use this information to gauge further actions, but it tends to be very, very incomplete, which is a difficult thing to sort of measure and monitor. But those that have documented what their occupation is. The highest numbers we've seen, certainly within Brentford, Isleworth, Ostley and Sion, we've seen a high number of self-employed individuals who are self-employed. We've seen a lot of health and social care workers. We've seen key workers as well, and a lot in front-facing jobs, which I guess is understandable, given that those are the areas where we're still seeing people working. Next slide, please, Moina. So this slide here is about the COVID-19 deaths that we've seen in the borough. So every day, Public Health England produces daily statistics on the number of deaths due to COVID-19 from people within the borough. In terms of more granular information, the Office of National Statistics conduct sort of weekly mortality reports, but in terms of COVID-19 there is a significant lag. So what you're seeing here is information of the number of COVID-19 deaths up until the 30th of November. And essentially what the map is showing, again, as the previous maps at ward level have shown, the darker the purple, the more number of deaths due to COVID-19. So what the map is displaying is that across the borough we have seen number of deaths, but again, as I've mentioned, this is up to only the 30th of November. This is not accurate to what the picture is now. But in terms of the demographic factors of those that have died due to COVID-19, 87% have been over the age of 60 and 42% alone have been over the age of 80. In terms of the gender breakdown, we have seen nearly double the number of men die due to COVID-19 compared to women. And then in terms of ethnicity, we've recently been able to match up ethnicity with NHS number, and the ethnicity breakdown, which we've seen the highest sort of death rate, has been within the Asian population. But in terms of the general granularity and number of deaths, Asian ethnic group has seen the highest, but then followed by white British. Next slide, please, Moina. And then this is just solely breaking down the information of COVID-19 deaths in Brentford, Isleworth, Ostley and Sion up to the 30th of November. So up to the 30th of November, there was 18% of the total number of deaths up to this point have been within these wards. And just some more demographic factors to provide to you. We've seen significantly more men die due to COVID-19 than women. And the age profile is somewhat similar of what we've seen with the rest of the borough comparatively, with 74% of deaths over the age of 60, 40% of total deaths over the age of 80. But interestingly enough, there has been more documented deaths under the age of 60 in comparison to the rest of the borough. Next slide, please, Moina. I'm going to hand back to Kelly. Thank you.
So generating this information is all well and good, and certainly over the course of the pandemic, for the time since February, when the infection cases started to emerge, we haven't really had access to much data at all. This has improved dramatically over the last few months, so it's allowed us to keep a really clear picture of surveillance, to actually understand how the infection is spread within different communities, to be able to identify cases and clusters of cases, and to be able to respond to outbreaks of disease, particularly in vulnerable settings. So we've monitored it, we identified it, and most importantly, it's about responding. And our single priority is protecting our most vulnerable people in our population. And by definition, for COVID, it is people over the age of 60, particularly over the age of 80. There are some people, younger people, who have died, but the majority are in that older population, and for people who have a pre-existing long-term condition, and especially sort of people in our care sector. So we've had many outbreaks, and since certainly in the last sort of 2 months, once we've identified this this Kent variant, which is significantly more transmissible, we've seen quite a number of outbreaks and clusters of cases, particularly in our care homes. And what we've seen within our care homes, which was different from the first wave, is that once we've identified cases, by the time we investigate further and carry out a full home testing as part of routine testing of staff and residents, it has generally spread because of this period of time between exposure and developing an infection status. So we've had lots of outbreaks in care homes, all of which have to be managed, and supporting care homes with infection control, and also to support them in terms of their staff well-being and the care of their residents. We've set up a new infection control service, and our general practitioners are supporting each of the care homes. We've had outbreaks in schools to a lesser extent. I think what we anticipated when schools came back is that there would be lots and lots of cases of transmission between children and transmission of infection between children and adults. That's not what we have seen. Obviously, children, because their immune systems are much better, are more likely to be asymptomatic. So where we have seen a cluster of cases in schools, it tends to be among school staff. We now have testing sort of rolled out in schools, and obviously schools are only dealing with key workers. We do have a lot of children in schools, given that it is solely there for key worker children. There have been a few outbreaks in hospitals. Certainly Feltham Young Offenders has had a number of outbreaks, and today we have sort of organised the council to take over the testing of the facility. A number of cases, sort of clusters and outbreaks in businesses and workplaces. And as Sam mentioned, having that information about where people work is really key, because it allows us to put the pieces of the jigsaw together in order to identify that a number of cases have emerged in different sectors. Once we've identified a workplace where there have been a number of cases, our environmental health and our enforcement officers are then able to work with those businesses to understand where that infection transmission is occurring. Our biggest concern at the moment is houses of multiple occupancy, and at present, and probably for the last few months, we've seen a number of registered HMOs where there have been a significant increase in cases within each of those environments. But also, in addition to that, we've also identified where there are unregistered HMOs, and when we visit those, because all of this requires us to follow up, there has been a plethora of social needs that have also had to be addressed, and we've also picked up outbreaks in sports clubs as well. So on the back of this, the National Test and Trace Program is run by definition nationally. So testing is led by the Department of Health and Social Care. We're able to work with them to identify where we want them to be best located, and this is for this PCR. These are the laboratory testing sites, and when somebody tests positive, it then is inputted onto a national system, and that allows the national tracing team to follow up those cases and contact individuals to find out where they've been, who they were likely to be in contact with, and to offer some support. Now, many of those cases are not picked up in that first 24 hours, so those individuals are then referred to Hounslow. We then pick them up. We then try and contact those people, and when we can't contact them, we go and knock on the door. And then where we identify that they need support in their isolation, we then refer them on to our community hub, where they can access some support from the council services. Recently, in addition, we've also set up a number of rapid testing, these lateral flow device testing sites within our community. We've got 4 at the moment: one at Hounslow House, one at Isleworth Library, one at Heston Library, and one at Staines Rugby Club. In addition, we've got 2 mobile sites, 2 mobile vans that go around to various businesses to try and target employers that are operating essential services. We'd have quite a lot of capacity of that. I think our business case for actually developing that was pre the the national lockdown, so it's very much targeted at key workers. Done a lot of work on communication engagement, led by Ben's team. So Sasha will mention in the next few slides about what the work that we're doing. This all requires, this is not while it's a public health led response, it kind of recognises that actually as part of a system, we are all part of our response. So partnership with leaders, organisations, communities, faith groups, schools and health and social care have absolutely been essential in order to manage the response and the impact of the response. And obviously, as Sam has said, it's a very dynamic and iterative situation we find ourselves into, and as new technology develops, we are constantly flexing the way that we respond. And also in terms of how the national strategy or the changes in the national strategy seems to be constantly moving forward, seems to be constantly moving, and how we're able to respond to that. We don't get any heads up when the national strategy changes, so we are constantly having to respond. Next slide, please. Sasha, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Kelly. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sasha, and I joined the public health team earlier last month in the role of community engagement officer. And I'd like to share with you some information on how we are working to use the data Kelly and Sam have just shared with us, along with other resources to carry out effective engagement and communication with our Hounslow residents. I'm actually going to start with the bottom section of the slide. So using the data that we have seen around the geographical infection rate, the demographics, and the socioeconomic status of residents, we can see the impact of these factors in terms of the infections and the subsequent deaths. We have therefore done a lot of different work using the data to ensure we are being as effective as possible, engaging people into receiving up-to-date and correct information and guidance comfortably, as well as directing people to testing and now vaccine services. The data collected has shown us that we have a large number of HMOs in the borough, and so we have written to landlords and tenants to provide them with guidance and information, highlighting the testing services on offer and also detailing the test and trace programme. The data has also shown us that a lot of the residents that are leaving their homes for work work at Heathrow Airport or related services. So we're working quite closely now with Heathrow to ensure that we're doing the best we can to mitigate the risks that are taking place. In August last year, in August 2020, we launched the Community Champions Program, which I'm now leading on with the support of my team. So the Community Champions are volunteers who, with training and support, help improve the health and well-being of their families, communities or workplaces. They motivate and empower people to get involved in health promoting activities, create groups to meet local needs and direct people to relevant support and services. Community champions reflect their local communities and vary by socio-demographic factors, including age, ethnicity, gender, health status and education. Community champions contribute in different ways that range from relatively passive involvement, such as sharing information, to more active involvement, which includes consultation to provide insight into community needs, and collaboration, which includes working in partnership and having shared decision-making power in the planning, design, implementation and evaluation of services. Since the launch of the Community Champions Programme back in August, we've recruited 110 community champions. Our community champions are as diverse as our borough is, and we aim to continue to grow the programme, recruiting people to join at any given opportunity. We are aware of how important it is to utilise existing trusted connections, and so welcome people that have a very far-reaching network of people, as well as those that may only have a small network of even just a handful of people. A weekly newsletter is sent out to the community champions, which include key up-to-date information that can be then presented to the community champions networks in the most appropriate ways. Some champions will share messages from the newsletter through their social media platforms, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, to name a few. Others will compose emails, text messages, use WhatsApp messages. And we've heard recently that there are a few people that are just simply making phone calls to those that don't have the internet connection or smartphones. So there's a champion that talked a lot recently about how she is calling each individual person in her network, up to 40 people on a weekly basis, relaying the messages. So it's just really impressive that the champions are going above and beyond to really ensure that the hard to reach communities are really being targeted as well. Essentially, the Community Champions Programme sets out both to disseminate the correct and up-to-date information, as well as receive details of what is being felt by our diverse community members by listening to their feedback. I'm holding informal catch-up sessions twice a week for the champions to meet one another and share their experiences. These have been going very well, and the information shared in these sessions really help us to form relevant, effective messaging. We have already shared some communication ideas with our champions, which has helped us to decide on what to use. So having their feedback has been really crucial in making decisions moving forward. I welcome you to get in touch and becoming a community champion yourself, or even nominating someone else you may feel may be interested and suitable to join. Thank you for your time. Okay.
Thanks, Sasha. Next slide, please. So our absolute priority here is managing the demand for health and social care. And as I've mentioned previously, the rates of infection are directly correlated with a sort of prospective increase in hospitalizations and deaths. So this slide was put together yesterday. So when we look at between 11 and 18 days ago, our rates of infection were between 915 and 731 per 100,000. Today they're 400. So we have started to see a reduction against the middle of January. But as I say, while rates continue to be pretty high, what we are finding is that hospital activity remains considerably high, and also to take account of the fact that when people do go into hospital, if they become seriously unwell and they require intensive care support is not merely an in and out, it is a long-term intervention. So as we see the numbers increasing, the number of hospitalizations, there comes a time when capacity starts becoming a little bit pressured. So we have to escalate the number of beds quite dramatically and start working as a system within London and within sort of border counties to start moving, particularly the more acute sort of inpatients around, so that they get the right care, the right care in the right place, and we just manage that demand. It's done through networks. So lots of activity going on. Part of that activity and managing that is also to make sure that additional support and is delivered in our community care settings, and using our NHS services to particularly work within our care homes, manage outbreaks and provide that additional support. So where we can avoid hospital admissions, we can do so. So next slide, please. So as I've said, I think I've probably mentioned this, sort of the reducing the rate of infection is about testing and identifying people and getting people into isolation as soon as possible. We know that our case positivity rate did reach a sort of high of around about 30%. We absolutely know that not everybody who should be tested is getting tested, because we also know that if you get tested, you are legally required to isolate. So therefore, we know that some people choose not to do that. We also equally know, as I say, that there is asymptomatic carriage, and people do not realise that they are infectious, which is why we have set up a number of these rapid asymptomatic testing sites. I've mentioned the role of enforcement and communications has been picked up with by Sasha. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to steal Dr. Mahmood's thunder, because he's in a better position to respond about vaccination program. What I will tell you is some of the sort of information about uptake, and just say it's an NHS-led program. 22,000 people plus have been vaccinated. There are clear joint committee for vaccination and immunisation priority groups. We are very clear about not moving outside of those priority groups, because at the moment the vaccination plan is targeted at reducing the number of deaths because the rates of infection are incredibly high, which is also why they've moved to getting everyone as many people partially protected through one vaccination, rather than getting everybody half those people protected with 2 vaccinations. There are 4 primary care sites. I know that they're sort of Heart of Hounslow Chiswick Health Centre have been operating for a period of time. I know that Councillor Lukey has been working with the CCG chair to address some of the early issues with Thornbury Road Health Centre. I think that's work in progress to improve that. And as of last week, Feltham Assembly Hall came online. Essentially, these are NHS chosen sites, and they are the preferred sites of the PCNs. The max vaccinations sites, there are 2 which will serve our borough, one at the Heathrow end of the borough and one in Brentford will go live in February and March. There is a little bit of a couple of weeks delay in those over and above which we anticipated because of some of the logistics in terms of national supply. So 2 vaccinations in progress, the Pfizer vaccination and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccination. And somebody did ask a question beforehand, what was the split in the vaccinations used? So it's about 44.5% AstraZeneca, 55.6% Pfizer that have been in the borough. Side effects, that was also a question that was asked previously. It's consistent with some of the side effects of other vaccinations and what were the side effects that were picked up as part of clinical trials. Some people won't experience any side effects, other people just may experience sore arm, tiredness and some mild fever, and some people have felt pretty lousy after their vaccination. And we've mentioned about sort of local communication engagement group, and a lot of work is being done on vaccine hesitancy or people who are, you know, clear anti-vaxxers to provide the right information outside there. That's being led by the NHS and supported by the council. But there is a lot of inaccurate information circulating. Next slide, please. And another question that was asked pre the meeting was the vaccination uptake. So this is the data as of today. So priority group 1 is residents in a care home for older people, older adults and staff. So 1,250 people have been vaccinated. We reckon that's roughly about 75. Now, the reason why it's only roughly about 75 is because of this outbreaks that we're having in care homes, you can't vaccinate people who are testing positive. So we have, in a very safe way, vaccinated all of our care homes. All of our care homes have had access to vaccination. We have partially vaccinated all of them, but we will be going back 28 days after the last positive case, to go back and vaccinate everybody else in line with national guidance. So 80% of over the 80s have been vaccinated. For priority group 2, frontline health and care social care workers, the offer has been completed. There will be some that we will mop up. But for example, the hospital have vaccinated, you know, in excess of 97% of their staff. In terms of priority 3, the over 75, some of our primary care team have moved on to that, so 75% have been completed. The over 70s, 70% have been completed, and the clinically extremely vulnerable, obviously that's priority group 4, so a lot of work is still going in some of our primary care network areas to tackle the over 70s. So at the moment, there is 30% of the clinically extremely vulnerable people who've been vaccinated. The expectation is that has to be done by, or the expectation is that for those to have been completed by the 15th of February. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to leave that one and then pass over to my colleague, Dr. Mahmood.
Thank you very much, Kelly. That's a very sobering presentation. I've got one that I'd like to share, so I hope you can see that. Is that okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So I'll just give you a little update on the vaccine program on the ground, and there is some doom and gloom, but you know, I will try to contextualize it for you. There are some important things that I just wanted to kind of talk about. I'm only going to spend about 10 minutes, so I'll be as quick as I can. I want to show you some videos as well, but I'll talk a little bit about COVID and the Pfizer vaccine in particular, what's going on in Hounslow. You've got pretty comprehensive outline already, and then we'll answer some questions together. So COVID vaccination, as you all know, is highly transmissible. People don't have symptoms in the often at the beginning, and that's when it often spreads. The vaccine was approved in December. This is the Pfizer vaccine, and it works by identifying the spike protein on the COVID virus, and then builds antibodies and T cells. It's really important to know that there's no egg or pork products in it. It's not a live vaccine, so you can't. It doesn't give you COVID. It's given by 2 injections normally in the upper arm. Not usually. The initial guidance was between 3 and 12 weeks apart. That guidance has been revised now to for it to be around 12 weeks instead. There is lots of trials done in different countries which show that it is effective, and it works across different ages and ethnicities. So one of the challenges is to basically ensure that we are offering the vaccine to, as Kelly showed that graph earlier, the top 4 groups of patients. So that's basically everyone 70 years and over, and those who are extremely clinical vulnerable. And you kind of think, well, why? You know, why over 70s? And I think this table is quite a useful graph, table which shows you how many vaccinations you need to give to prevent 1 death. And if you look at those 4 groups, between group 1, it's just 1 vaccine, 20 vaccines can prevent 1 death. And if you go to the group 4, you need to have 600 vaccines to prevent 1 death. So it's really, really, really important that we prioritise the first 4 groups. And as Kelly's mentioned, you know, we're making some fantastic progress with that over a relatively short time period. There are some people who can't have the vaccine. There's generally very few, actually, and your GP will be able to talk to you about that. There was some guidance around pregnancy, so that's a specific conversation that you'd need to have with your GP. But generally, if the benefits outweigh the risk, then we would give the vaccine in pregnant people, even though it wasn't tested on people. This was in the news today, I think. So side effects, a significant number of people in a recent survey said that they 30% had side effects after having the vaccine. As Kelly mentioned, it's often quite mild side effects. And the good news is that the UK has bought over 300 million vaccines for a population of about 67 million. So, you know, there are lots of vaccines available. We will have enough for everybody. It's just a question of sort of getting the ball rolling. And it's our job to make sure that we articulate that and, you know, just to understand the reasons why we're offering vaccines to certain groups of people. So a little bit about Hounslow. I work in a GP practice in Hounslow, and we did a survey. This is months ago, before there were any vaccines, and we asked our patients what they thought about having the vaccine in the first place. And this is an area that I think is really important, because there are some people in those top 4 groups who are saying no to the vaccine, and we've mentioned some of that already. So this was a survey which we got in just 3 days, and we had about 2,000 responses. I'll play this video for you.
Hello, welcome to HIOS. We know you've all been through a pretty tough time lately with the COVID crisis. It's been a weird time for all of us. The way we provide our services has changed, as we've had to try and reduce the spread of the virus, and many of you have been tucked away at home. As you know, the virus hasn't gone away, and we still have to take precautions and be very careful. We don't know yet whether there will be a second wave, and if so, how bad it will be. But what we do know is that as we speak, scientists are working hard on a vaccine to protect us all from COVID, and there are high hopes for that vaccine to be ready and available within months. As we wait patiently for that to happen, we really wanted to know what you thought about it. Are you planning on having a COVID vaccine when it becomes available? So, as ever, instead of sitting around just wondering, we asked you. We sent out a survey asking whether you were planning to get vaccinated against COVID and what you thought about it. We were overwhelmed by the number of responses we had, well over 2,000. Every one of those is really valuable in helping us to understand our patients, so thank you. So let's take a look at what you said. Around 75% of you said yes, you would be planning to get a COVID vaccine when it becomes available. But 25% of you said absolutely not, or you weren't sure. So why don't you want it, or why are you unsure about it? Well, 32% of you were worried about its safety. Will it do us harm, you said. 30% of you said you just weren't sure, you don't have enough information. 10% of you just said you just plain don't trust it. Another 10% of you said it just hasn't been around long enough, it hasn't been tested yet. 10% of you said, well, I'm healthy, I won't get it, or I've already had it, so I don't think I need it. And a few of you said, how do we know it'll even work? So those were your views, and it's so useful to hear what you think. At the moment, of course, just like you, we're waiting for a vaccine to be produced and then made available to patients. Hopefully there'll be one before too long, and of course you'll be the first people we tell about it. We will do our absolute best to address the issues you've raised in this survey when the vaccine is here.
So that's obviously that was done a few months ago before the vaccine was available. But what is really interesting, I think, is if you look at the outcomes for patients who are from different ethnicities, actually patients who from black ethnicities in particular are much more likely to get ill and die from COVID. And yet that if you, in our survey results, those same group of people were the ones who were least likely to have the vaccine. So it's such an important issue for us to try to understand why. We've got some ideas, and actually we're doing some work with Imperial to try to understand what we can do to help sort of support changing in behaviour. So little things about the vaccine. Please don't contact your GP. We will contact you. We have some lists of all of our patients, and we will be able to let you know when your appointment is available. And increasingly, we're having many more appointments now. And when you do come for your appointment, please follow the instructions that are provided. And probably the most important thing still stands: so hands, face, and space. So there are some scams, sadly. We generally in the NHS never ask you for your bank card details. We don't ask for PIN passwords. We don't turn up to your house unannounced saying that we're going to give you a vaccine. And we don't ask you for, for you to provide personal information like passports and driving license and bill slips for the vaccines. What we do need you to do, though, is we really need to know why people who don't want the vaccine, what the reasons are. And actually there is some evidence to show that sort of health officials telling you to have the vaccine or blinding you with science doesn't really help. So actually we need to, so I think the working with community leaders and organisations is a much better way of doing things. Share your stories and keep sharing those stories. And volunteer. So the vaccination centres couldn't run without volunteers. We've got something called highest helpers in our practice. So we've got something like 40 highest helpers, 35 highest helpers who help us with the vaccine clinics. They help patients getting online. They do loads of things, and it's fantastic for them. We'd find it impossible to run without it. There are so many misconceptions about the COVID vaccine. It contains microchips and people are guinea pigs and stuff. So I don't want to go into that now, but I think it is our duty to understand what the reservations are and help to address those. I just want to give you a little flavour of the clinics and how they run. So this was a clinic we ran in Chiswick.
Hi, my name's Zillow. It is now Thursday, the 15th of January. We're in the COVID Centre for Vaccination in Hounslow, and we're looking after probably 300 to 400 patients today.
So my name's Anna, I'm a paramedic. I've been vaccinating at the COVID clinics. So it's been going really well. I think we're getting about 300 vaccines done a day. And the marshals have been so helpful with getting people in and out, and the place is ready for the vaccines to happen. So, and our people mixing up the vials, because without them we wouldn't have any vaccine to give. So yeah, it's going really well.
And the patients, are they cheerful?
They've been lovely, really lovely, and it's so nice to see them get their life back, because a lot of them haven't been out since March, so they were really, really excited about it as well.
And for people who are not sure about having the vaccine, what would you say to them?
I would say get it done, definitely get it done.
I'm Hannah, I'm a nurse practitioner at Kaios. I was a vaccinator. It was quite fun actually. It was quite fun. Lots of people turned out. They were quite cooperative. They were consenting to their vaccines. Yes, we were explaining everything and they were quite happy.
So I have been a marshal today. I've been guiding patients through and helping them fill their forms in, asking various amount of questions on how they're feeling in their health, making them feel more comfortable and at ease to be able to get the COVID vaccination.
Is the vaccine have to be made up with anything? Is it super delicate?
Yeah, you have to be very, very careful, and you don't have to, you're not supposed to shake the vial, and you have to be very careful when you take it out of the fridge. And the amount of saline that you have to put in the vial, you have to be very careful. And for that reason, you're supposed to have another person standing there next to you, checking your dose, making sure everything is okay. So these are the ready dose, which we constitute already.
And how many doses are in there?
So each vial contains 6 doses.
Oh, right.
So, but obviously they need to be sitting here, and we need to make sure that we're using the first we constitute first.
Our GP talent here is creating a really buzzy atmosphere with a really good system to get them through a raffle ticket system. So whoever's first will get number 1, number 2, etc., etc.
I would strongly advise everyone to get the vaccination done. I think this virus has affected the whole world, and we just collectively, as mankind collectively, needs to join together. And we've got the science, we've got the research behind it, and if everyone just does their bit, I think we'll be fine.
Go and get your vaccination. It's well worth it. Listen to your GP, listen to your clinician. It will save you, it will protect lives, it will help the NHS.
And I want to show you something from the patient side. This was done last week.
It's awful, this virus, isn't it? I'm almost 80 years old, and I never thought this would happen to us.
The staff, definitely the staff, really cooperative, helpful, very helpful.
Staff couldn't get better. Couldn't get better.
They really worked very hard. I don't know where we would be if we didn't have them.
And Hounslow in a crowd, and it's getting really bad.
You have to be careful, don't you? You know, you always wear your mask and gloves. That's what we do when we go out. We always wear our mask and gloves.
The people who work for it day and night, relentlessly, just to keep us safe, we have to think about them as well.
Have it done before it's too late. No, because you never know when it's going to happen to you.
Do not hesitate, do not think. Should come forward. Everybody should come forward and take the vaccine.
It's for safety for themselves and the others. Come and get it. At least we see a man do it. One day we come to a stop.
It gives you some psychological feelings as well. I'll feel safe.
So we just take some questions, and we would love to hear your thoughts on how you feel that we can support patients, particularly those patients who may not be sure or may need some extra help or questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmood, for that fascinating presentation. I think it's fantastic the work you and your colleagues are doing, and we're very honoured to have you here. I mean, for my part, I was personally very pleased to have done some work with one of the organisations behind the Oxford vaccine, and they were doing trials of it in Brazil over the course of months. And it's so interesting to see this now being deployed, having been proved successful, deployed here in our borough. I mean, my parents are getting their vaccine on Saturday. I certainly will be taking it when I'm offered it, and I hope everyone watching at home will take the vaccine when they're offered it. So we'll take questions for you now. We'll take questions for Kelly and her team as well. So I'll hand over to Joan to take the questions that we already had. It may be that some of those questions were answered as part of those presentations. I know that Kelly noted a few in advance, but Joan, perhaps we could go through the ones that haven't been answered already.
Chair, this is one for Talik Mahmood, Dr. Mahmood himself, and it's set there in the chat. If after receiving the first Pfizer vaccine, one gets COVID-19, how long do you have to wait before you can access the second dose? And does one need to get the first vaccination again? That's question one. And then we have a number of questions with regard to the Thornbury Road Clinic, social distancing and separate entry and exit points. Has this been achieved? And then there's a summation from Christine Dywell based on her own experience. What alternative Isleworth buildings were considered for use as a vaccination centre, and why was the Thornbury Health Centre selected in preference to others? One you've actually answered about the comparison of take-up, but there are 4 others. The percentage split of the types of vaccines used in Hounslow, i.e. Pfizer versus AstraZeneca. The stats mentioned in the questions above, will they be published and where will they be able to be seen? What's been done in Hounslow to target groups who are prone to be anti-vaxxers? And finally, can any information be given on comparisons of incidents and types of side effects with regard to the 2 vaccines? There are 3 further, which I'm happy to come back to, Chair, once with your agreement.
Thank you. Yes, let's hear from Kelly and Dr. Mahmood at their liberty for which ones they'd like to take on themselves where necessary, and then we'll come back to further questions.
Okay, Dr. Tal, would you like me to? Do you want to take the first question?
Yes, I'll chip in and reply.
Okay. So I'll leave you with a question about the second vaccine, because obviously it's more clinical. In terms of Thornbury Road, I sort of picked that up in the presentation. There was part of the national program, remember it's an NHS-led program, was to identify mass vaccination sites. Initially, we did identify a mass vaccination site in Brentford. That is still our mass vaccination site, but the primary care network sites were then developed subsequent to that. There were 2 sites that were developed in this area. One was Brentford Health Centre and one was Thornbury Road Health Centre. The NHS chose Thornbury as the site it preferred to operate from. In terms of a separate entry and exit, that has been sorted out this week. As I said, Councillor Lukey has been working with Dr. Annabelle Crowe from the CCG in order to address some of the early problems with that particular site, and there were some when that site was first used. In terms of the data, yes, happy to publish all of this. All this data is available. I picked up in terms of some of the work that started in terms of targeting groups of people who we know are at greater risk. It's our BAME community, and looking at ways to engage them, and many of our GP colleagues are working with those different groups, particularly the key workers initially, in order to systematically deal with any issues and concerns that they currently have.
Thank you, Kelly. And yeah, just to pick up on the clinical question. So if you have COVID after having the vaccine, the second dose at the moment is the government's advice is to have that at 12 weeks rather than 3 weeks. So and you need to leave 28 days between a diagnosis of COVID and having the vaccine. So that guidance is how it stands at the moment. There is some work going on which may result in that changing, but you get pretty decent sort of cover with the first dose. The second thing about the side effects, we've touched on this twice now, but I think that generally the side effects are relatively mild. I certainly haven't come across anybody who's had sort of severe side effects. Generally, they tend to be self-limiting and last for a few days and settle down with something like paracetamol. But I think the biggest thing that I just want to kind of try to get across today, and we really need everyone's help to kind of rally round, and is to understand, you know, Hounslow is a borough which has an ethnically diverse population, and I think it's just really important for us to test and see which messages work, how it works. I think some of the evidence suggests that listening to the likes of Kelly and me doesn't really help convince anybody. Giving data doesn't necessarily convince people. So I think what we need to do is to have test other ways of reaching out to people, and perhaps using emotional cues and understanding what drives people to behave in that way. And I think we have to get on with that work, and we have to get on with it now. Particularly if you look at the data of the first 4 priority groups, it's so important that we get as many of those people vaccinated.
Thank you.
Chair, there's 2 further ones. There's very quickly. This is for Kelly directly. Is there any liaison with the police on HMOs? And the second one is a weekly ONS survey has Hounslow at 1.7%, i.e. 1,700 per 100,000. Why is it higher than what Kelly was showing on her slides? Those are 2 for her. Thank you.
Okay, so the issue about the police, yes, we tend to work initially because I tend to work directly with our enforcement officers and environmental health service. They work directly with the police. We see this as a supportive visit from the outset. If we see people breaking the rules, that's when it's ramped up, and the police intervene. In terms of data is a constant problem with us, because different sites will publish different information. So it depends on the nature of the information that they're using, whether it's a specimen date, whether it's a reported date, and each of those has differences. So when it is a specimen date, we know on that particular day when that specimen was taken, that was the static picture of infection rate within that community, and often it's reported very, very differently. What we use is the Public Health England data, which is the national data set, which is based on people's names and people's addresses, when they actually book an appointment, and the information that's provided. So we do know that there are a few that kind of fall out because people give the wrong addresses, but they are generally matched in terms of an area or a borough. So none of the data is perfect, but at least with the Public Health England, it allows us to be able to use it in a more logical way, and also to be able to look at rates across the country and to know where we are in relation to them.
Chair, last and final question. I do beg your pardon. This individual has come back and asked if you could respond to her whole question. Why was Thornbury Road chosen over the Brentford Health Centre?
I'm afraid Tal, you may know the answer to that. My answer would be it was an NHS decision. It wasn't a decision of the council. It was taken by our North West London CCG's colleagues predominantly, but it was based on an assessment of which is a number of factors, which include accessibility, not in just solely in terms of the health centre itself, but in terms of the ability for people to get there as well. So there are a number of factors, but I can't tell you any more than that. I'm afraid it wasn't a decision that I made.
Yeah, I concur with that. The CCG and the GPs are put into groups called primary care networks, which is a small group of GPs who collaborate and help deliver care. So they can put forward potential sites, but the criteria for accepting a specific site is a decision that's made by NHS England using quite strict criteria. So it's not in our gift to have the final say on which site is used. We can put forward different sites, but yeah. The idea actually, I think, perhaps Kelly, which might ease the burden in the near future, is that more sites are coming on board, and more places are being able to vaccinate, like pharmacies, and there are max vaccination sites, and there are more vaccines. So I think this is the beginning of, there's always going to be some bumps in the road where you have a new system which isn't set up with your most elderly, frail patients in the middle of winter queuing up. That's heartbreaking, and it's just that the way things kind of panned out, and it was all done so quickly. I have, on the ground, I have every confidence that we have learned a lot over the last few weeks and months, and the process will get smoother, and I can totally understand the frustration that people are undergoing, but there will be more opportunity, more places to get vaccinated, and many more vaccines too.
Thank you very much, Kelly and Talak there. Joan, I can see one more question coming in from Justin O'Toole, yet to be published. I think we should take that. Just 1 second before we do. We have 19 minutes before the scheduled end of this meeting, so I'm going to suggest that we extend it until 8:30 so that we can finish this item, get everyone's questions in, and have time for open forum after that. So we will extend this meeting to a cut-off point at 8:30. So let's take Justin's
Can I formally move that for the purposes of the minutes?
Yes, please, Mel. I would be disappointed if it wasn't you doing it.
Chair, do you need a seconder? Chair, have we a seconder?
Cool.
We need a seconder.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anyone seconding?
Chair, Councillor Easton, I'm happy to second.
Thanks, Richard.
So, Chair, the last question is, there are different kinds of vaccines. How is it decided what vaccine a patient would receive?
Tal, do you want to answer that, or shall I?
I can make a start and then you can follow. I think I did a COVID clinic this morning, and we saw sort of, I don't know, best part a few hundred patients, and there were some questions about patients wanting to choose which vaccine they'd like to have. I'm afraid that there really isn't any choice, so you do not have the opportunity to choose which vaccine you have. You have the option of not having a vaccine, but what we can't do is we can't guarantee that there's going to be a certain vaccine on a certain day in a certain clinic, because many reasons that the supply chain is also going through its own sort of ups and downs, but again it's kind of stabilizing a bit. So yeah, that's all I can say really, is that it's actually becoming an increasingly common question, and it's not, again, in our gift to allow you to have an option.
Thanks.
The only exception, there's one exception to that, and you're quite right, Tal, is that because the AstraZeneca one can be moved around, and is more stable to be moved around, we'd have used that for housebound residents, because it means that we can go to people's homes and safely vaccinate. The Pfizer one is very unstable and can only be moved once.
But again, Kelly, you could just argue that somebody who's housebound might want a Pfizer vaccine. They too don't have.
That's
a
true. They don't have a choice. It's no choice.
There isn't any choice as it stands at the moment. I think in my presentation there are potentially 5 vaccines coming on board, and as it stands at the moment, I'm afraid there isn't any choice. Mainly because we don't have any choice. We can talk you through the pros and cons of a vaccine. We can explain that to you when you come in for your clinic for your vaccine, but you can only have whichever vaccine we have on offer.
Thank you very much for that, Talak and Kelly. So we're going to move to questions from councillors. So the first question is from Danish Saeed.
Could I chip in when necessary, please?
You can indeed. I've got Tony after Danish, and then I've got you, Mel, and then I've got Catherine. And I'll take, if we can, I'll take all the questions from councillors first, and then I'll have Kelly and Talak sum up at the end.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you to Kelly, Sam, and Dr. Talek. There's loads of information there, and it was actually really good to see the people at the centre receiving their vaccinations and being really enthusiastic about them. A couple of questions, actually. Kelly, I have sent you a couple of emails, and I'm sure you're sick of me, and Sam, actually. And actually, hopefully Dr. Talek can answer these as well. By the way, I'm a patient at your clinic, Doctor, so good to see you on here. What I want to know is, my question is, as usual, regarding rough sleepers and homeless people. Now, pre-COVID, I don't know how it worked with them being registered with medical practices, but what I wondered is, have they been designated as high priority? Simply due to the fact that they do not have, a permanent abode. They are on the streets, they are interacting with, lots of other people and all sorts of people. So should they not be designated high priority and given the vaccination? And in the same vein, I suppose, really, I'd like to sort of bring to the attention, what about illegal immigrants? We know lots of people sort of don't want to come forward, they live a life where they are earning cash in hand, and all sorts of things. Is there some way that they have been contacted? I know that sounds silly, but encourage them to come forward simply to be vaccinated without the fear of being grabbed by the authorities. And lastly, I think what I'd like to ask about is the volunteers, not the COVID volunteers, but the volunteers who are out on the streets or working in soup or volunteering in soup kitchens. Are they being vaccinated? Are they being considered high priority along with the care workers, please? I think that's it.
Thank you very much for that, Darnish. Let's take in this order: Tony, Mel, Catherine, and then I'll ask Kelly and Talek to come back. So, Tony.
All right, thank you, and thanking everybody again for the swift resolution down at Thornbury. It was a real pain it was sad to receive all those messages from residents who had been down there, who had been reporting just one access and uncrowded. One resident said they didn't feel as unsafe in this last year as they did when they went to get their vaccine. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, the CCG. Thank you, Hounslow Highways, for sorting. And the message is, find another place. Find another place. Encourage people to find another place. I know Ruth Cadbury's on the case, but find another place, even if it's a satellite. Look, you've got West Thames College there, just round the corner, or down the road. Buy the 5 bus routes, and I think that's why Thornbury was chosen. Buy the 5 bus routes with music, good music. Let's get up and dance. Look, and there's plenty of buildings there, plenty of space there. There's also the other building on the corner of London Road and Bridge Road. So there's that. I'm concerned about getting back to the unregistered HMOs. Yeah, I'm concerned that we're just leaving it to the enforcement. These should be reported immediately, the unregistered HMOs, to the planning department, and whoever's in charge of planning these days makes a great effort to get that regularized, because we're getting away, people are getting away with exploitation, and I think some of those unregistered migrants might be staying there. I'm also concerned about site workers, Kelly. Because site workers are moving about, and they live in these crowded conditions in HMOs or in HMOs, unregistered or otherwise, and they're getting on the tube and they're going into town, going on the building sites, or coming into our town, coming into Hounslow Town Centre to build those that monstrosity on Key Site 1. But yeah, that's been done and dusted, and I think even the council's going to buy some stuff there, and then we would perhaps be implicated. But where are these outbreaks in the sports clubs? Who is it? Is it outbreaks down at Brentford getting away with? I see them cuddling each other when they scored the goals yesterday at playing Bristol City. Which sports clubs are? I thought they were all shut down now. We've got goals, and I've got the police down at goals, Gillette Corner, regularly to go and to go and turf out the kids from there. Sorry, I'm boring you, and I, Kelly, but but you know, there's still a lot. There's still a lot to cover. But in the meantime, you know, thank you for all that you're doing. All right.
Thank you, Tony. I'll take Mel next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, a very important observation. I've long been worried about reaching the hard to reach. I'm absolutely delighted that our community champions are now picking up people that don't have access to computers or the like, and you know, getting them along to vaccinations and to feeding the information that they need about other services from the council and other agencies. So well done for that. That's a big step forward. The second one is a question, and I'm not sure that you can answer it. Hounslow Council and West Middlesex Hospital began to build up a very good hospital to home service after a shaky start. Because of COVID, can I ask, are you aware how that is now bearing up? But more importantly, how are the very vulnerable people that have been in hospital due to COVID for, say, a month plus, how are they being supported going from the hospital to their homes? Because I think this is very, very important. Chair, I'm grateful.
Thanks, Mel. And I'll take Catherine, and then I'll ask for our speakers to come back on all that.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so my question is, can we be sure that no vaccine is being wasted in Hounslow, in our borough? So we've all read news reports about where spare vaccine has been disposed of. Differing reports about what the instructions are from the NHS or to the NHS, and then from NHS managers to healthcare professionals as to what they should be doing at the end of the day when they've run out of people to vaccinate but might have some vaccine left over. I want to make sure all that is being used. If ideally from people from the particular groups that are being targeted at the moment, but otherwise get it in anyone. I don't care if it's a strapping 22-year-old, I don't care if it's a Tory MP, get it in someone and don't waste it. I was actually appalled to read that it was being wasted, and that people were criticising people who had taken up offers of the vaccine in order to stop it being wasted.
Thanks, Catherine. I'll come to Kelly and Talak to take the questions that you wish to take out of that lot.
Okay. Do you want to start, Tal, or shall I start? Your choice.
Best you go, because I've got a follow-up question for you as well, actually, following on from the categories. I think it's important to clarify and raise this as an issue, because it is a national thing about groups who are not. There's a lot of newspaper reports about so vaccinating patients who are from ethnic minorities over the age of 50, and the fact I think it's worth just sort of discussing the fact that why that's not available at the moment.
Okay, so shall I start? So in terms of the homeless, they will be captured. At the moment, they are not part of priority groups 1 to 4. There is information that's coming out in the next few days that will give us an indication of when they are going to be vaccinated. They are already identified as a vulnerable group. We do have a designated GP, Dr. Garcher, who works with the homeless community, and he's commissioned to work. So he's on board. We know how many we know an indicative number of people who we need to target, and because we've got an all-in arrangement at the moment, most of the time we know where the majority are. So while we haven't got a definitive date, it'll be after February the 15th, because that's where the priority does need to be those 4 priority groups based on that joint committee for vaccination vaccination and immunisation. Once they're done, we'll have a better picture of when that's likely to be, in line with how much supply we are going to get, because at the moment the supply is really focused on those 4 groups by the 15th of February. Because those are the people that are most likely to end up in hospital, which kind of brings us to Councillor Dunn. Vaccine being wasted. I'm not aware of any vaccine that we have that's been wasted. We have lists of people who are waiting to be called at last minute. What we've done is we focused on booking people who are by definition of clinically extremely vulnerable and age in first, and what we've ended up doing is then having a list of people who are health and social care workers who can move at speed should we have any vaccine available. So there is clear, as part of the plans, we have that contingency arrangement in place. In terms of Councillor Saeed, in terms of illegal immigrants, at the moment we're really focusing on the sort of the clinically vulnerable who are registered with general practices. That's the majority of people, but we know that there are certain groups that are slightly off the radar. I know that is an issue that is being picked up. The Home Office, for example, are working with us in terms of the priority groups, that those particular immigrants that are within their HMOs or within the accommodation. It is not, as far as I'm aware, it is not a complete picture yet. There's still lots of work to do. In terms of site workers and voluntary community sector workers, I would say that I have had so many emails from councillors, from community groups, from everybody who can give me a really good justification if I were the one that were choosing the priority groups, which I would hasten to add, and I think I've told people so many times, the decision is not mine. It is based nationally on this Joint Committee in Vaccination and Immunisation prioritisation, but I can absolutely tell you that everyone can give a reason as to why they should be on top of the list, and many of them can come up with very credible reasons. So that is why in Hounslow and in many other areas, and we know that there are some people that have been slightly slacking in terms of their interpretation of the guidance, we are absolutely consistent across Northwest London that we target only those people that should be targeted. So there isn't this lack of fairness. So that's where we currently are. In terms of hospital to home service, I can't tell you about the hospital to home service, I'm afraid, but what I can tell you is that there is additional community support looking after people who have been people who have been in hospital who are still positive. There are 2 Mary Robinson what we are labelled Mary Robinson units. These are units that look after people in the community who have tested positive, who can't be cared for, who can't care for themselves at home. So instead of being going to care homes or having to be supported by domiciliary care workers, there are 2 units that have been established for those people. Where people need some additional support, we have spent a lot of time supporting our community carers in order to provide that additional support for people in the community. So they are being supported where they are assessed as needing it. I think there was another question about unregistered HMOs. We do work with Vicky Wallace and the housing team. So where we do find unregistered HMOs, we do alert people to it. Often it's pretty random when we find a postcode and we find someone having tested positive, and when we turn up to the address, that's when we find those locations. I know that in the other area forums, people have highlighted that they know of these unregistered sites. If people do know, then please flag it, because there is probably a community of people in there who we haven't reached yet.
And so just quick points. I mean, I think just for patients who are homeless or rough sleepers, or you can register with a GP. You need to be registered with a GP. You don't need any form of ID to be able to do that. And you can be, and if you're out of the area, you can register as a temporary person. I think the key message is that it's got to be within those 4 priority groups, because if you look at the vaccinations required to prevent 1 death, it was 20 in group 1 and 600 in group 4, and some of the people are in other groups. The issue around the BAME stuff is a hot issue, and Kelly's on it. So I think, you know, when the guidelines change, we will definitely be able to help and support that. And Councillor Dunn, I think you raised a really good point. As far as I'm aware, I mean, we didn't, for the record, we didn't waste any vaccine when we did our clinic this morning. We did go out into the high street to look for a Tory MP, but couldn't find one. So, but we, I think it would be an interesting report for us to look at. So I think it's not something, I'm not aware, Kelly, if we would actually kind of report on number of wasted vaccines, but perhaps we should. And perhaps the contingency plan is around having backup patients that you can vaccinate. But perhaps we should clarify that and get back to you. So yes.
Yeah. In terms of vaccination, we know that in terms of vaccination, that has been sent to our vaccination sites, our operational vaccination sites. I'm aware that, because we've asked that question was asked of Ellie, who's leading on the vaccination programme at an all members meeting last week, and no vaccine has been wasted.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Kelly and Talak. Thank you, everyone, members of the public and members of the council, for their questions. We're now going to open it up broader to questions from the public on any matter that they wish to raise. We've had a number in advance. I'm going to go to Joan to read those out, and then we'll, if we've got time, we'll take some supplementary questions from Q&A. We've got half an hour. We've got till 8:30. I'll give it 25 minutes just to give us any other business at the end, but let open forum commence.
Chair, we have a number, and we have responses to a number as well. The first one is from Christine Dywell. When some councils achieve this, what valid reasons are deterring reinstatement of the full planning committee to attend and open at its virtual meetings? We've had a response from Thomas Ribbetts in Democratic Service, which will be posted to the website. He says it's important to state that the planning committee is operating legally currently. Virtual meetings take longer, which means that fewer items of business can be processed at each meeting, and as a result it's been necessary to schedule additional meetings to complete the necessary business requirements, which in turn puts an extra strain on council's resources. A return to full membership on virtual meetings of the planning committee, whilst desirable, would mean that the committee meetings would take even longer to complete than currently, which could necessitate further additional meetings to be scheduled on top of those already planned. In light of how busy the council meeting diary currently is, it's felt that a return to planning committee with the full membership in attendance would at this stage not be feasible. Members are reminded that the council has not been able to schedule the full list of council meetings as a direct result of the additional resources pressures imposed by virtual meetings. So that was the first question and answer, Chair. Then Dominic West asked about the South West Railway withdrawal of train services. What representation has Hounslow Council made to South Western Railway about the withdrawal of the early morning trains, and what has been their response? So we've had the response from Traffic and Transport. Hounslow has responded to the South West Railway consultation on the proposed amendments to some late night and early morning services from December 2020. And whilst we welcome the changes that improved access to the network for maintenance and reductions of overruns following overnight works, we highlighted our concerns regarding the effects on shifts and other key workers who may rely on these very early and very late services for access to their employment. And then one further and final one from Dominic was regarding, and his question was the council informed about the flooding of the Duke of Northumberland River in Isleworth last Friday, given that untreated raw sewage spilled into St John's Road, local parks and gardens of properties in Mill Platt Avenue? Is the council satisfied with the actions taken thus far by the Environment Agency and Thames Water, and is the council satisfied that the parks are safe for us to use? And we've had a response from Wayne Stevens saying he's looked into the various this matter with various colleagues, and he actually says they were not aware of the incident and neither were their providers. He confirms that they're investigating and will seek more clarity from Thames Water and the Environment Agency on any and all actions that may have to be undertaken. We will update once we've established the full facts. Those organisations may also not be aware of the street-based and park-based issues which Dominic has kindly raised. So that was the answer from that.
Thanks, Joan.
That's it. Sorry, Chair.
Do you mind if I cut in there? Just
not at all.
As ward councillor
please do.
for Isleworth, where Mogden is based, I personally, and I don't speak for the whole council here, but I do want it on record that I am not satisfied with the actions of Thames Water. I've heard from residents who are telling me that Thames Water, pending investigation, have told them that they have to claim on their own insurance. And I think that is utterly wrong. That's going to push up their own insurance premiums. I think Thames Water should be offering residents compensation, adequate compensation for this catastrophe. And I know that Thames Water has been actively engaged in the clean-up operation, and that's all to the good. Residents I spoke to today, though, still tell me that there is damage there, and this is a particularly serious problem. And I think Thames Water do have to do more to adequately compensate residents. There was a meeting of Thames Water with residents today at 6 p.m. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there because I've been chairing this meeting, and often they do tend to clash with Isleworth and Brentford Area Forum. But I know that our MP Ruth Cadbury is there, and I know that she has been demanding full compensation for residents, and we absolutely have to be clear. I don't think Thames Water's done enough. But I'll hand over to you, Joan, for the rest of the questions.
So final two questions are around crime and policing. One is, are the police making progress in tackling catalytic converter thefts in the borough? And can the cameras being used for enforcing on parking restrictions around schools be used for other purposes as well, such as crime prevention and monitoring? And I think Kay is going to take a note of those questions, Chair, and get a response from our local police colleagues with your agreement.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we have enough time if any residents do wish to put a question into the chat box. I note that in the past area forum, some residents are asked for there to be a little bit more time for follow-up questions, and this is your opportunity now. So if you, in the next 10 minutes, want to type a question in, and if it's possible for it to be answered or for us to arrange a follow-up answer by email, then we shall now. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. I'll just give it 1 minute, just in case it takes a little time to ask questions. But that's fine. I think we can. I'll come back to any questions if any do arise. But while we're waiting, I will just draw people's attention, of course, to our policing update, which is agenda item number 6. It's for information. We don't have the police here, but you know, as previously mentioned, any questions that are relevant to those reports, please do put them in, and answers will be given. We also have the conservation area appraisal. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat box. Conservation area appraisal consultation. Members are asked to note this report as an information only item to alert members and residents to the fact that the consultation has begun on the appraisals for Isleworth, Riverside and St Paul's. Everyone's encouraged to participate in the consultation, which is due to end on Saturday, 20th of March, 2021. And in terms of any other urgent business, I know of no other urgent matters, and I haven't seen any further questions come in from residents. So I think that brings us to the end of the meeting, and we will update in due course on the dates for future meetings. So I want to thank everyone for coming here today to speak, to listen. I want to thank all the officers, all the members, and everyone who contributed to this meeting, all the members of the public too, for their questions. Thank you all, and have a wonderful night. Take care.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.